Welcome everyone to the No Good Podcast. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with the co-founder and chief gaming officer of the fan-controlled football league, Patrick Dees. Patrick, first and foremost, I want to know, how are you doing and your loved ones during the pandemic?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. First of all, today I'm particularly well because anytime I get a chance to do a podcast, I am excited. I'm well, man. It's been a weird, I think for everybody, right? Just to get real immediately. 2020 was a weird year for us included. We'll get into, I'm sure, the journey, but let's say 6+ years of putting this thing together. And there were moments in early 2020, when we'd always been thinking about fanless sports, but we had some funding challenges because the venture capital world was put on ice early pandemic. And I just think it's been a weird year for everybody. And I'm myself, the loved ones are all doing well. Thank you for asking. Right. But yeah, it's been a bizarre, crazy roller coaster of a year for everybody. And so anyway, thank you for asking. We're doing well.
For sure. This whole COVID stuff is something that we all couldn't expect to come, and it affected everyone in so many different ways. But I just want to ask you specifically about the league. What were some of the deciding factors in making you want to create this? What went into the process?
Yeah. Truthfully, I think if there's 4 co-founders, I think you asked each one of us, the answer would be a little different. Okay. But 2 things that I would say are consistent. One, that people, we get asked all the time, where did the idea come from? And it's literally everybody who's ever watched any sporting events had this idea. Everybody, you guarantee you've thought about it at some point, that you could call a better play, or what's that coach doing? And you screamed at television.
Yeah.
We're the only ones crazy enough to do it. And I think for me, the desire to do something like this came from the fact that my 2 favorite things on the planet are video games. outside of loved ones and all that thing, but video games and live sports. And a lot of folks who love video games, and a lot of my really good friends in the gaming industry, don't love or even understand live sports. And the same thing with my friends that are really deep into sports. You know those guys that know every stat from everything all over. They know nothing about the latest games, especially the cool narrative stuff that's going on. And so for me, and I actually learned, I talk about it a lot, but real-time play calling experience has always been coupled with my live sports experience, because I learned the rules of football through playing Tech Mobile when I was really little, and then Madden as I got a little older. That's how I learned the rules of football. My dad, dude, is a great father. He's incredible, but just not one of those sports guys. He grew up, he was in high school, he was a vocal ensemble nerd and a drama guy, and didn't ever feel the need to teach his kid how football worked. And so for me, I grew up learning football through playing video games, and then I would watch the game, and it always feels like the volume is turned down a little bit when you're not doing that lean forward experience, where you're not in control, calling plays, you're leveling up personally. And so I had another startup with my partner here, Saurabh Fruity, which was in the mobile space. We built the Kelly Blue Book of cell phones. And we were, getting ready to sell that. We knew an exit was on the horizon, and we were trying to figure out what's the thing that we were going to do next. And so, Saurabh always told me he was going to buy the Cowboys, which was utterly ridiculous, because here's his mid-20s, but Jerry Jones is going to outlive all of us. And then the second piece of that is that the exit wasn't going to be big enough to buy the goddamn Cowboys. So what are we going to do? And then we started kicking the ideas around. Look, now we're young, let's take a shot. And so we got into just sports in general and tried to introduce technology into it, and then iterated until we got to, the what the league ended up being in season 1.0.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah, for sure.
Makes perfect sense. Well. I think we can definitely associate that. For me, I actually did really get into football and the NFL, specifically, obviously, back in 2007, 2008, when I picked up my first copy of Madden. And I've watched Super Bowls, obviously, but it is kind of how you get into it, right? Especially because at the time I had never played. And I think, in a sense, you've almost kind of cornered this new generation, right? Because I think for us, right, I'm just under 30, right? I think our generation was I think I would say most of our generation plays video games, right? But there's definitely a good portion of them that don't touch it at all, right? Especially I think a lot of athletes still won't touch it at all, maybe because they can kind of live through that experience. But for a lot of people, they won't, right? And so they'll play a Madden, they'll play FIFA, they'll play all these other games. And I think in football specifically, there is definitely times, even now, right, where people will be saying why did you punt the ball? Why'd you punt the ball? Obviously, your game doesn't have any special teams, so you've kind of eliminated a few things,
Yep.
which I definitely think is interesting. Can you talk about that though? Like what are like, because obviously, so you have, what is it about? It's three down linemen, right? And then is it 4 downs or 5 downs?
It's 4 downs.
Four
There is an
downs.
opportunity to earn a 5th down. And that comes from like when I moved to LA. Let's take a step back. So what we did was we said, look, what if we were originally we had a one fan run team in an existing league. And so we were playing in those league rules, but then we took that team out because we had 100 different countries calling plays for this team. It was this outrageous success. We said like if you were reinventing football for the digital age, for our generation now, what would it look like? It wouldn't be 3.5 hours. There's nobody in the history of sports that said, fuck yeah, a kicker's here. Nobody's ever said that. So we pulled kicking out of it. And the other thing that to me was important is when I moved to LA, I think about that time you were like in 2007, 2006, I was always a Kobe guy. I wasn't always a Laker fan, but I moved to LA. You can't not be a Laker fan. And so you'd hear people say things like, dude, we won last night. And they're always like, wait, did you have anything to do with it? What's this we thing? Like, what do you mean we won? Kobe had a lot more to do with it than you did. Like, I don't understand if you said the Lakes won. I think there's this desire for fans to participate and actually make a meaningful difference outside of, kind of during game day. And so the idea was that, we've got these things called the 5th down that was sponsored by Progressive, but that you could earn that through quests over the course of a week, that collectively as a team, you could actually give your team, it doesn't change the game. I think there's a strategic element to it, but a one-time chance to actually contribute to your team on the field. And that's where that 5th down came from.
Yeah, I think the rules are especially interesting. Even like, the way you guys will kind of go for the point after. It's a very different and unique league. So I kind of want to talk about that because there's obviously a pretty easy parallel to your league in the XFL. Yeah. And obviously this past year, they didn't end up playing. Vince McMahon sells the company. But I want to go back to like a comment Mark Cuban made about the XFL, saying that basically, he would say that it wouldn't be a good business venture to kind of go into something in terms of football that is not a feeder league into the NFL. So how will fan control football kind of stand out on its own and be its own sort of different thing?
That's such a good question. And he's right with a caveat. So that model, the XFL's model, the AAF's model, and not to rag on those leagues. So I know a lot of folks in those leagues, they are fundamentally broken, right? The idea of putting butts in seats and selling those butts, beers and hot dogs. I mean, if you've got, unlimited capital to burn for 20 years, then you establish brands like the NFL, but that is like the world's greatest moat. And so I think he's right. I think the AAF was doomed from the beginning. I think the XFL's got a real challenge ahead of it if it wants to do, disparate stadiums and ticketing and sell. Like, our goal from the very beginning was to change the model, and we call it a league in the box. And so what that league means that originally we were 8 teams, pandemic caused us to be 4, but we're going to continue to expand. We put all those teams in one place, and it became a shared services model that allowed me to reinvest heavily into one facility, have a state-of-the-art facility, unbelievable technology in one amazing and cool location, as opposed to, 8, 10, 12 different like leases negotiated with stadiums. That we always keep it, ostensibly it's a television studio. So there's a studio audience for like atmosphere and ambiance, but like my goal is not like, that's not my target audience. Like the digital audience is infinitely scalable. We saw it with our proof of concept team, 100 different countries called plays for that team. And so the idea of like building a product around putting people in seats is ridiculous to me. So I am absolutely with Mark Cuban. And in fact, I love Mark Cuban in the sense that like the Mavs, they were like a case study for me in a lot of ways, because the Mavs are, you guys, I don't know if you're big Mavs fans, but that team is like
huge
an
Mavs
extension.
fan right here. Huge
What's that?
Huge Mavs fan over here. Of course.
All right. But like, forever, man. Like I've been a big Cuban guy. Like Dirk was my boy. Like the idea that team was and still is an extension of his personality, right? Like, do you know what I mean? And that for me was like, well, shit, we can do teams that are based on like we can have like celebrity owners infuse these teams with their individual type of swag. They don't have to be located. Fandom doesn't have to be geographical or generational. It can be motivated by these owners, right? That's why I liked Mark Cuban. I hate the city of Dallas. I mean, I'm sure you've got Dallas listeners. That's not going to win me any fans. But I love that team because of Mark. And that's when we started putting up this murderer's row of owners. We're like, dude, Quavo, Marshawn Lynch, Richard Sherman, these guys that like are huge personalities, both on and off the field. And we can talk about the kind of guys that we recruited to play, but that, you know, you talk about the Mavs, and it really served as an inspiration to me for this model as a whole. And he's bang on, man. I think trying to build an XFL is ridiculous. It's that model's so broken, unless it's a feeder. You're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been the key, right? Is the NFL just they have the market on talent. They almost have like practically like a monopoly over football as a whole, right? It's you can't compete with them, right? Unless you've got some insane amount of wealth that no one's ever heard of. But what you talked about there, I think is really important, right? Is like how geographical stuff can be important to people, but I think more and more it's becoming less important to people, right? Especially like lots of people move around. Like, how can you say like, oh, I'm a Philadelphia fan, but I live in Washington. I've lived in Washington for like 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But now what it is like you were talking about with Kobe, right? And so now with you guys, I think this is really, really intelligent, is that you guys have said, well, look, people want personalities. They like personalities. So it's not just the personalities in playing football, which we're going to get to, but also the guys like you're talking about, Bob Menery, Richard Sherman, Quavo. How did those guys get involved with your league?
Early on, we had decided, look, that was going to be the model, removing geography from it, saying, look, we're all going to play like, 8 teams, 1 location. And who are the people that we think can anchor these teams? And it really started with like Ray and I throwing up a whiteboard, and we had, like a dozen or so names, and it looks strikingly similar to what we ended up with. We actually had to consolidate a little bit when we went from 8 to 4 teams at the beginning of the pandemic, to tell some folks, be like, hey, we're going to get you into season 2. But it was just that. It was like, hey, look, Sherman is like, one of the all-time trash talkers in the NFL. That dude's incredible. So we put his name on a board, and then we were like, how do we get to him? And then, through relationships and when people knew people that introduced us to Mitch, his manager. And it's an easy pitch. The same thing with Marshawn. It's an easy pitch. Yo, do you want to own a football team? The idea that there are only football teams are like beachfront property, in the sense that there's just so many that you could even possibly own. That's just it. Like there is high-end Malibu, and then there's like, down the street Malibu, but it's still Malibu. You still own a professional football team. It's the idea of telling these guys, look, you have always been somebody different who didn't fit the mold. This league is going to reinvent football, and we want you to be a part of changing the game. And like, I think every one of these guys and gals to a person was like, yeah, let's go do this thing. And so we went out and find big personality, again, Sherm, Marshawn, Renee Montgomery, people who are just larger than life and think a little bit differently. And so that's how we started thinking about how do we get to these people, and excited about season 2, because we have some more like huge traditional celebrities and some other kind of digital natives that are really big, stars in that part of the world. So anyway, so we thought about these, who can carry a team, and then we went out a little bit by kind of key vertical, right? Like we got the NFL guys, we went out and found like R&B, Quavo was at the top of the list. We had some other folks, but like Quavo was like, yeah, dude, we're in. And so we try to have like, kind of funny. It's a smaller community, but it's a very positive community. It's easily activated. It's, easily monetized. And so those guys made a lot of sense. And so anyway, we're very excited about coming into season 2 next soon.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, actually. So how do you think the first season went? Is there anything that you guys have talked about changing, like adding more kind of more games in general? Is that something that might be in your interest? I guess with more teams, that's definitely a potential outcome, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the answer is, do we want more? I think that we want, and I mean, there's going to be more teams. There's going to be more opportunities for fans to have their voice heard. We're going to give even more access. One of the things that like we got, it depends on how you choose to look at it. Some fans loved it. Some fans thought we were something, I think rightfully so. Like Bleacher Report wrote a whole article about how nimble we were. I don't know if you remember in week 3, we changed a rule between games because fans had voted on the onside kick rule, right? And had said, hey, we want it anytime. But the reality is, if you keep doing it, it became make it take it. It was too easy to get that first down. And then teams just ran it over and over and over. And so we immediately put that rule up for a vote and said, I know you said you want it anytime, but here it is. It's not a good product. And fans in real time voted against it overwhelmingly. And so we want, the fans that related to that is nimble and us trying to listen to our fans. We're going to double down on those folks. And so going to give fans more access, more opportunity to affect the game on the field. And then I think season 2, we're going to continue to find better ways to give fans access to personality. We talked a little bit about Kobe. Our big focus. So this season, we said, look, there's 500 guys that could probably play at the level that we wanted to. We get some incredible athletes, but then we hired a casting company. And so that casting company went to the man, talked to every one of these guys and got to know them and said, hey, look, who are the guys that like light up when there's a camera on them, or who wants to be a content creator or has an amazing story? And those are the guys that made the league. We cut a bunch of guys that just, ultimately, because a different breed of athletes going to be successful in fan control football. You look at Jordy. That guy immediately got this game. He was out telling the aces to tag him immediately before we'd even really talked about tagging. That's exactly kind of what we wanted. And so we're going to find, we put 6 studio shows around the league to give fans an opportunity to get to know them off the field and kind of for them to kind of build their brand. There's going to be more of that. It's going to be formatted a little bit differently, but yeah, more of that, I think. And I think we're going to do a better job of onboarding fans. I think, we're overwhelmed. The response was incredible. You asked how it went. We're thrilled. I mean, when people got it, they got it, and very deeply. Like, it just resonated with folks the way we knew it would. The number of people that saw our league, we had 13 million people see 6 games. It's incredible. So we needed a better job of teaching people. The number one thing we saw every week was, wait, I can call plays? And it was just 100%. Like, that's the point of this league. And so we need to do a better job of teaching people, onboarding and tutorializing that, look, for example, I heard constantly my mom's friends, this is anecdotal, but my mom, she felt good about calling every play because she knows you can't call a bad play. There are better plays to call. Every one of those plays are plays that we want to run in individual situations, but you can't call a bad play. You can't punt on first down or put in your grandma on second down. You can't do those things. So feel free to call the plays. And I think we need to make sure that people who aren't traditional sports fans or don't know X's and O's feel comfortable on, calling that sweep right. Because it's, if it doesn't get called, it doesn't get called. But if it does, it's a pretty cool experience. And so anyway, I think more of all of that is, and then you look forward a little bit, and we've talked about it publicly a lot of times, the name of our entity is Fan Controlled Sports and Entertainment, and it's sports is plural. And so the idea is not stopping with football. I mean, our next foray, I think it's fine to start saying that we're talking about baseball right now. I think ideally we'd start to get into cricket. I don't know anything about cricket, but I know there's a huge global audience there. I think baseball, absolutely. I can swear on the show.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you got to fuck up baseball. You have to.
Thank you.
Why wouldn't you? Again, I'm a big sports guy and I can't bring myself to watch baseball on television. I can't do it, but there's some really cool shit that you can do. I think to have it feel more like a video game, have it be a lean forward experience, have it be 3 inning, 1 hour sprint. You can do some really cool stuff to make it way more interesting than the game is currently. And, guys like Trevor May, owner in this league are down to help us do that. So anyway, you asked about what's coming, and it's all of that. So
nice.
So I would have to imagine that the cricket games are going to be less than a couple of days long.
That's the hope. Rock and roll and cheerleaders and all that. Yes.
Yeah. I think that would be interesting. I think that'd be especially bringing it over, I'm assuming, to a more of a Western audience.
I mean, we want to go where fans exist, but if we had a similar opportunity to make, people fans of football that weren't fans of sports live, then I think, if we can create a compelling game, and I think the key there too, again, is we want to elevate those personalities. So we have the right owners and then the right guys on the field that are cool and interesting and have these crazy stories. And we can tell those. I think that we can be successful, regardless of the sport.
I just want to ask real quick before we kind of finish up, Patrick. For me, like football, when I think of it, let's say I was the player. Let's say I'm the quarterback, right? I feel like it's kind of tough to sell them the idea some guy, from their vantage point, right? Some random kid is calling plays for them.
Yes.
How do you pose that idea to a guy like Johnny Manziel and Josh Gordon, stuff like that?
It's a killer question, and it's easier than you would think. So superficially, you're totally right. That sounds tough. But 2 things. One, they're not typically calling their own plays, right? Johnny's not calling his own plays. There's an offensive coordinator. So that play's coming from someone else that's not him anyway. And then you talk a little bit about, I think it's really easy for players to understand that people know more about the game than they've ever known, right? You look at the advent of fantasy football and Madden, dude, people know football in a way that like, they don't know other sports necessarily, right? Like they know what a 4-3 defense is and a prevent defense is. They understand the X's and O's in a way that like they haven't before. And so I think when you tell athletes, look, people know this sport, and the ones, you know, you talk a little bit about the fan IQ system, and the more you're engaged, the more plays that you call that are successful and you're helping the team out, the more weight your vote carries. So you're not getting clowned on by some trolls, right? It's guys that are, and gals that are deeply invested in the league that want to see you successful out there. I think people get it. We've had very little pushback around some of that stuff. But, you know, the tougher sell sometimes is the coaching staff, because the coaching staff they shift. It's less real-time game decisions. There's some of that. There's a lot of strategic element for like when you use a power play and those things. But like, most of their coaching is done in the week leading up to the game, because what they do is the way the play calling system works, you know, plays are surfaced to fans algorithmically based on down and distance. But that is the coach's job to fill up those filing cabinets with, here are these 6 plays we want to run based on down and distance and position on the field. And so the tech is set up, but it doesn't work without coaches being able to know their teams well and game plan over the course of the week. So it's a shift to get them thinking differently, but players usually get it pretty quickly.
Awesome. Now, I just want to ask you some quick hitters just before we go, just some fun questions.
Yeah.
Now, this is the No Good podcast, mostly music podcast, and our listeners would be very upset if we didn't ask you, Patrick, what music are you listening to, man? What's in your playlist?
Oh my God, what a question. Okay, so transparently, there was a long time in my life where I was deep into music. I was making playlists every month. Instead of a journal, I would be like, okay, what are the 10 songs I heard for the first time this month, whether they be new or new to me? And then I would organize my playlist by month and year. So I could go back and look at February 2013, listen to the playlist and be like, oh, I remember what was going on in my life. The last couple of years, I really moved away from like contemporary music. I've been like almost all podcasts, almost all books, but I've been really listening to, as we've gotten ready for the season, I've been listening to a lot of Churches. I don't know if you know Churches, but big Churches fan. Listening to a lot of.
I'm gonna write that down.
Oh yeah.
No, I'm gonna write that down.
It's spelled CVHURHES, and they are. I should know where she's from. I'll email you right after this a couple other songs. Okay. It's like synthy pop, but a lot of heart to it in a way that I think a lot of that pop doesn't. It's very cool. A lot of Run the Jewels coming into this season.
Nice.
A lot of RTJ, and then weirdly, what's the song? Oh man, I should know this. I really sound like a neophyte. Who sings "All the Way Up"? Nothing can stop me. I'm all, you know that song?
Oh, is that Fat Joe and those guys?
Fat Joe, yes, thank you. Yes, okay, so I was listening to that, the remix of that on repeat, because one of my other co-founders, we rented Airbnbs as we were getting ready for the season in Atlanta, and every morning he'd wake up at 7 a.m, he'd put that song on repeat and just fucking blast it. We listened to it like 9 times. It was like, all right, let's get psyched. Let's go start a league. So I've been listening to a lot of Fat Joe just because
I can see how that's really motivating. If you really all the time, totally. I might try it as my alarm clock this week and see if it works.
It works. I'm telling you, it gets you going. A lot of churches, a lot of Run the Jewels.
Awesome. Lastly, we also got to ask you, it's a staple question we ask all of our illustrious guests. What is something that everyone loves, but you don't? What's no good to you?
Be it sports or music or
anything, food, sports, whatever you want.
I think, God, this is a super nerdy question. I think this past season of Doctor Who was just an unmitigated dumpster fire. I thought it was trash compared to the earlier. People seem to love it, and I can't. There's this terrible Rosa Parks episode, and it's like I don't. It's like I'm not even watching the same show as everybody else. So this past, I don't know if you guys are Doctor Who fans, but to the point where I rolled off of it, and it was something I thought I would never do. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Usually I'm on the other end of things, like really enjoying things that most people don't like this new Outriders game, which is on Xbox, that I'm loving, that people are really criticizing. So
right. Okay, good answer. I know there's going to be a lot of hate, a little bit of love, a little mixed reviews when this comes out, but guys, don't get on us for it. Don't get on us for it. But just before we go, let our listeners know what's happening for next season, where we can contribute, put our support and love behind.
Well, first of all, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me. I'll come back anytime you'd like me to. I'd say you can find me at P to the D's on Twitter, and also we're at FCFLIO on Twitter, and the website's fcf.io. Go literally. I mean, all the updates will be there. There's what I can say would be 2.0 is coming sooner than you would think. So there'll be more fan control football, I think, sooner than people are anticipating. So keep your eyes peeled to that stuff.
Awesome. Patrick Dees, thank you for taking time out of your super busy schedule to come sit with us here today on the No Good Podcast. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was awesome.
Awesome. Until next time, it's the boys from the No Good Podcast. We'll see you soon.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Lingo Sports and Lingo News for a whole lot more just like this.